In 1998, Detroit pastor Bill Wiley Kellerman wrote, "When the power of racism reigns within the church, it is noticed in the suppression of gifts. The word of God and the Holy Spirit is forever busy stirring up and calling out boldness in people to exercise their gifts and faculties on behalf of the community and in service to humanity and all creation. Meanwhile, the demon of racism is busy intimidating people or suppressing, refusing, devaluing, and denying those very gifts and faculties, rendering them unknown or inaccessible to community and to creation." Friends sometimes understand anti-racist work as one item on a menu of possible social justice projects. Angela Hopkins has taught me that it is woven into the very fabric of our being together. As a Quaker, I resist thinking of myself as a person who has the power to oppress. Yet until recently, I was not bothered by the fact that I always felt comfortable, even cozy, in my monthly meeting, a familiarity that comes from knowing my fellow members well. Many of us have known each other for decades. What I've learned from Angela is that it is in those very moments of comfort that I can be the most likely to exclude or shut out and the least accommodating of difference. And when others are denied a place at the table, friends lose those gifts. I hear Angela Hopkins as a prophetic voice in the Society of Friends. Through the work of the Friends Center for Racial Justice, she has brought to New York Yearly Meeting the message that every place where friends encounter each other is a place to dismantle racism. She teaches me how to name it, how to interrupt it, and how to choose another path. Friends, please welcome Angela Hopkins.
Good evening, friends. Thank you, Antonia. Welcome to Yearly Meeting Session, 325th year. Quite an accolade for us. This evening, we will be sharing with one another about ways that we can embrace our past and how we can look forward to envisioning our future in spite of all of the trauma we found ourselves in right now, with all of the deaths surrounding COVID, all of the racial justice. Well, we're happening right now. Hopefully this evening we will leave here feeling a little bit more encouraged, maybe a little more prepared, but ready to live into our future. Now, first I'd like to just share with you that this is probably going to be a little different than any plenary you've ever attended. But then this is the time of COVID. What is the same? Everything is turned upside down and different. So I kind of felt that maybe we needed a different process to share around our work for this week, these 2 weeks. on screens, not person to person, face to face. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, and then we'll go into breakout rooms so that we can have some time of worship. And then we will, after some time of waiting worship in our group, someone will read the query, and friends will share what's on their hearts in regards to the query. We'll come back together as a large group, and we'll share a little bit out of the time that we had in our smaller groups. So first, I just want to tell you that this is extremely uncomfortable for me. I'm not used to talking about myself, and it is a little uncomfortable, so bear with me for a minute. But I think it's important for us to get to know one another. As I look for the future, what is it that what I personally feel like will move us towards the longings of our heart, help us to find the individual and the institutional energy to address the things that we are sitting with right now. This time of not knowing, of deep, deep sadness, but yet hopefully we can find the spark of hope. I've spoken with several friends who've been around a while. I have to admit that I just went to this place of sadness after George Floyd was killed, and then it was just one thing right after the other. And several of these old-timer friends shared with me that somehow they sense that this is different. And I certainly hope so. I certainly hope so. So I was born in Dayton, Ohio. My grandfather and my grandmother, my grandfather first moved up from Mississippi to Ohio in search of employment, like so many folks did during that period, the migration north. He came up with 4 other men. They lived in a tenement house together until they raised enough money to send for their families. They began the little church that I grew up in that ended up being one of the largest churches in the city. My grandparents were very important in my life. My grandfather took me to see Martin Luther King. He was my date for my first march. My grandfather was European American and Choctaw, very fair skin. And as they say, he could pass. And he was blessed to move straight up from Mississippi to Ohio and get hired by Frigidaire. My grandmother was African American and Blackfoot. smooth chocolate, silk-like skin, hair down to her knees, long and straight. My earliest memories of racial incidents had to do with both my grandparents. One with my grandmother, just recognizing the struggle that she had because of her skin color, even among people of color. Hopefully we've come a long way, baby. We can appreciate the beautiful hues and diversity within people of color. My grandfather, I always felt that my grandfather had such a challenge. He was always up there in the front of all the marches, picking everyone up, taking them to vote. His activism was very important to him. At that time, when color was a big thing, even within the different racial groups, it always seemed like he felt like he had to do a little bit more to prove that he was Black enough. Although back then, the word Negro was the word. Being raised in a missionary Baptist church, I guess you can imagine what my life was like. Sundays, you went in the morning and you were there all day. And my tutors were the deacon on the deacon board. I learned the piano from the pianist at the church. Our church was our whole life, our whole community. Although the understanding of mission in the African American church, I think, was a bit different. I know we struggle with the word mission in many ways these days. But language is a very important part of the work of anti-racism, and there's so many neat words that we need to reclaim. So I was talking with a friend one day who was saying there are more Quakers in Kenya than anywhere else in the world. Being curious as I am, I had to go see. I'm like, what is it they're doing? How did that happen? I didn't even know that there were Quakers that still existed. I went to my first triennial and met a very wonderful woman, Pastor Priscilla McKenna, a woman. Now, although our church was very progressive, there were no women deacons and definitely no women pastors. After the triennial, I was invited to travel with her. And Priscilla just had that way about her, that light. I traveled with her as she went throughout the region, meeting with the other women pastors, listening to what was on their hearts, their joys, their sorrows. And it got to where I was spending more time there than I was spending in the States. And Priscilla said, you need to find out about Quakers in the U.S. So having been a member, my membership was at Elgon East in the church that Priscilla founded and preached. I received my minute, which reads, Angela Hopkins, follower of Jesus, released to share the good news wherever the Spirit leads her. And I think that's still, even though in Quaker circles, folks will probably think of me in terms of the work around racism, but if you met me in another context as a teacher, folks would say, oh, she's an educational activist, you know. Bottom line is, I am a follower of Jesus. I do the best that I can. I'm grateful for the awareness of my humanity. And I'm grateful to be released as a friend. That word for me was more than just being released to travel. It was a whole new sense of myself in terms of identity. I called my pastor from home and said, I've met some Quakers and I really feel led to continue my work in the world. And you have to realize that the deacon board, I grew up with them, you know, sitting on their laps when my mother was singing in the choir. I had gone home with this one friend, and so if you can imagine them all sitting around the table asking questions about Quakerism. And when we got up to leave, the most important thing was, are there folks that can support you on your journey as a follower of Jesus? And so I shared with them the realities of who we are as friends and the diversity that we have. And today I'm very grateful that I took that trip to the Triennial. And ever since then, I've been asking myself, is there a place within Quakerism for me and my voice? All of me. I'll be sharing a little bit more about that later. As far as my background, I have 3 gorgeous grown children, lots of grandchildren. My baby went to Boston University, and I went up to pick her up one Christmas and had lunch with the woman that was standing in back of me in the McDonald's while we were waiting for Elie Wiesel to lecture. I was just floored at that opportunity. And Joy's roommates asked, he's Jewish, you know. I said, yes, I know. They were perplexed, and And so we ended up in this conversation about the common threads between the African American experience and the Hebrew experience. The girls went their way. I walked to the lecture with the woman that was standing in back of me, who at the end said, "There's a program here you should think about applying for." And I'm like, "No, a pastor, I'm a woman." You know, it's amazing, these things that we internalize, and we don't know why. All I knew was I love the church. I enjoy being there, but this is totally new for me. And she said, "You don't have to be called to be a pastor. You just have to be interested in church life." It was a program called the Pastor Scholar Program, and I was really blessed to get in it because I had 3 children in college, and there was no way I'd be able to afford to go myself. And that put me on the path of really exploring the various opportunities that I just have no way of even being able to begin to share about how that all came about. I had one person say to me, "You do all that traveling, you must be rich." And I said, "Oh, no." My first trip as a friend was with Agley. It was in Burundi. I've spent time in Burundi, in Rwanda, in Ethiopia, Kenya, South Africa, Palestine, and Israel, and all over Europe. As an educator, spending time in schools with children, and I just want to share one thing that just came to my heart. I was in a school, in a classroom, and what I generally did was I would bring supplies and hang out with the teachers and have fun with the children. And a plane went over, and normally when a plane goes over, our kids run to the window. And all of the children were like under the tables, like I've heard that there was a period in which that was the way it was here. That was the beginning of my awareness of the impact of trauma on children and the families. So that's a little bit about me, and I'd be happy to answer any other questions that friends may want to ask. So our plan for tonight is we're going to go into breakout groups, and we're going to have waiting worship. Let's spend some time in silence, pondering the query before going on and sharing about how it relates to you. Our query for tonight is, how can we contribute to building a more faithful and inclusive community? And where are we now in our work regarding this concern that is so visceral for us now as a result of all the deaths that we have been witnessing and the marching? after taking time to really sit with the query, please take a moment and describe your understanding of the following words: faithful, inclusive, and community. Now, everybody doesn't have to speak to each of those words. Whatever feels right for you to share, whatever is there. I hope that's clear. We'll have about 15 minutes. Someone in the group will need to read the query. I look forward to rejoining you after we've had the time to see what Spirit has for us tonight. As the clerk of the Task Group on Racism, many of you were around when Jeffrey Hitchcock said, go visit. And the Task Group on Racism sent word to all of our meetings that we want to come and listen to what is rising. Not a cookie cutter program, just come and listen and sit with you. And that was a remarkable experience. And we now have the Friends Center for Racial Justice as a result of that process. But some of the other things that I'm sure came up in some of your small groups, of all of the collective voices of friends that have come to the Friends Center for Racial Justice that I've met at various meetings. There were 4 main concerns that were raised. And I'm going to read them. And I'm sorry, we're not going to have a whole lot of time to talk about them tonight, but I don't believe in, creating the wheel again, so there'll be lots of resources that you'll be able to access information to. So the number one concern is the building of an anti-racist structure. Friends have said they long to be, they recognize that as we reflect on a lot of our history and rework the narrative, so to speak, really long to examine our structure with an anti-racist lens. Another concern was that we be courageous in naming our legacy, as well as the current reality about racism. We experience racism on 3 different levels: personally, in our group, and systemically. The importance of doing the inward work as well as the outward work, the work on examining ourselves. Where is racism lying with us? And by no means does that mean that if we're looking at ourselves, that's the totality of the work, and that we don't need to do anything other than that. And on the other hand, constantly working and looking at others out there as we engage in the work of systemic racism without, doing our internal work, really can create an opportunity for us to do more harm than we anticipate. So it's important for us to do our own work and for us to find the courage to muddle through that when we, not if, but when we hit the bumps. The other concern was that folks felt we needed a space for some authentic deep conversation that around the work of anti-racism. And the other thing was that the desire for reconciliation with people from a variety of backgrounds. So these were the main concerns that rose. And the thing that I would ask is that folks think about, what is the motivation for my doing this work? Why am I feeling so passionate about this? And is it because, yes, there are terrible things happening in the world and I want to go out and fix things or fix people? Not that charity is a wonderful thing. It's important for us to engage in that, but charity is not justice. And the work of racial justice, these are rights that we're all entitled to. We will not do it perfectly. There are no golden stars here. We will 2 steps forward, we'll fall, we'll get back up. But the important thing is that we get up. Rest, but do not stop. I'd like to read my favorite, one of my favorite sayings by Woman. There is a principle which is pure, that is placed in the human mind, which is different, which in different places, in different ages, has had different names. It is, however, pure, and it proceeds from God. It is deep and inward and confined to no form of religion, nor excluded from any. Where the heart stands in perfect sincerity, and whosoever this root takes root and grows, of whatever nation, they become brethren in the best sense of the expression. We are human beings, friends. We're not saints. Although I did find an old book at the birdhouse as we were going through the library of Quaker saints. We're not saints or superheroes. We're human beings. And the challenge of being human is just accepting our flaws. But there's the awareness that, yes, we all have flaws. But looking for the opportunity to embrace our experiences in totality, recognize that we have gifts as well as challenges, and try to change every situation into an opportunity, learning and growing for ourselves and others. There's a tremendous power in that awareness in our humanity. We have the promise, we as friends, we believe that there is that of God in everyone. There is gift and challenge. I pray that we'll move forward in this work, and that this truly will be a Kairos moment in which all of the calls for racial justice will manifest. What I have heard as I have traveled among you is the desire for action. What are the things that we as individuals can do to create a more just community for everyone in our community? Thank you, friends. So I know there are a lot of folks who've asked and who are curious about the Friends Center for Racial Justice. We have about 5 more minutes, and if there are any questions specifically about that, I would be happy to answer them before we have some closing worship. Please put them in the chat. Antonio, will you please read them?
And they come.
Friends, you need to put your questions in the chat to Antonia.
Still waiting. First question is, oh, here lots of questions. What's the best way to support the Friends Center for Racial Justice?
So we have a very strict policy here. Friends must engage in personal discernment and figure out where they're feeling led. We are new. There are so many needs. There's so many ways of engaging that everyone who has this concern, from the time we opened our doors, you can walk inside the building. In each room, there's a list of things that you can do. So by all means, if you're interested in connecting and supporting us in whatever way you feel led, please do so.
Another question. Is the Friends Center for Racial Justice just for Friends, or is it for everyone?
So the Friends Center for Racial Justice has the same mission basically as the Task Group on Racism, and that is for us to examine racism within the Religious Society of Friends. That is that piece of the inward journey. You know, we're looking at ourselves as individuals and looking at our structure. However, there have been friends, there have been lowercase friends that have come to FCRJ and have found their way to Quakerism, and who enjoy and find the workshops and the events beneficial. One of our top participants is not a Quaker, but she's learning.
What are some of the events that have been, the varied events that have been held at the Friends Center?
Oh, I don't think we have enough time to mention them all. There have been a whole variety of workshops, starting out with looking at the sense of community, what that means in a racial justice cultural context. The understanding of community can be different for each of us. We've had trainings, we have had work on spiritual accompaniment, just a whole variety of things. And we have two working groups. We have the working group on reparations, and we've had, unfortunately, our second workshop for this year was canceled on reparations due to COVID, but we will be having that one again too. And it's really, I encourage as many folks to think about coming because there's so many varieties of ways. Many folks are, they hear the word reparation and it freaks them out. But there's so many ways of engaging. And so I encourage folks to check it out.
One last short question. Where is the Friends Center for Racial Justice?
The Friends Center for Racial Justice is in Ithaca, in a wonderful place. In the Burt House. It was the home of two friends who donated it to Ithaca Monthly Meeting. It's a wonderful spot. You can come for workshops. You can also come for private retreats. We have a wonderful grounds and a waterfall in our backyard. So if you're looking for a place to really come and, make the most of both worlds, relax, but also connect with other friends, consider coming. So it's exactly 9 o'clock, friends. It's time for us to say goodbye. Can we have a few minutes of closing worship, please? John Lewis. George Floyd and all of the other men and women. Who have lost their lives during this period. Amen. Good night, friends.